They ran out into the damp air, the roar of engines growing louder. She threw open the car door and pushed him inside, her hands trembling as she jammed the key into the ignition. The car sputtered once, then started. Headlights flooded the street behind them. She hit the gas. The tires screeched on wet asphalt as they shot forward, the bus shrinking in the rear-view mirror. In its shattered windows, the faintest flicker of red light still glowed, like a heart refusing to die. And as they disappeared down the road, the sound of shattering glass echoed behind them. One final breath from the past, breaking open at last. The night had taken her home, her safety and her peace. But as Clara drove into the darkness, she wasn't just running anymore. She was being hunted, and somewhere behind them, the ghosts of Santiago were wide awake and following fast. The world blurred into motion. Rain still streaked down the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up as Clara's car tore down the narrow road. Her hands gripped the wheels so tight the veins stood out against her skin. Ethan sat beside her. Why? Died, still half in shock, his voice trembling. "Mom, what's happening? Who are they?" Clara couldn't answer. Her chest heaved, breath ragged. The glow of headlights flickered in the rearview mirror. One car, then another, gaining fast. "Mom," Ethan shouted, panic rising. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. Just hold on." The tires screeched as she took a sharp turn, the car fishtailing before gripping the asphalt again. Mud splattered up from the roadside. Behind them, a pair of headlights swung around the corner like a predator finding its prey. Clara pressed harder on the gas. "Seatbelt," she yelled. Ethan fumbled to click it, staring back through the rear window. "They're following us, I know." The engine groaned as the car surged forward, weaving through the backroads that wound between stretches of farmland and forest. The world outside was a smear of darkness, rain, and motion. Every shadow looked alive, every flash of light a threat. Ethan's voice cracked. "Mom, tell me what's going on." Clara's throat was tight. Something was hidden in that bus, something people want, badly, and they're not going to stop until they have it. He turned toward her, disbelief mixing with fear. "You mean the jewels? That's what this is about?" Clara didn't respond. She couldn't bring herself to tell him that the truth was worse, that those gems weren't just treasure, but evidence of something rotten, decades old, and dangerous enough to kill for. A flash of light cut across her face, headlights in the side mirror. Another car, closer this time, her pulse spiked. "Hang on." She veered off the main road, turning sharply onto a dirt lane that led toward the hills. The tires skidded in the mud, the steering wheel jerking in her hands. The engine screamed as the car fought to climb. Behind them, the chase car followed. Its beams sliced through the fog, steady and unrelenting. Ethan clutched the door handle, his knuckles white. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they can't find us." "Do you even know where that is?" "No," she admitted, her voice breaking. For a moment, the only sound was the engine and the storm's whisper against the glass. Then, a pop, sharp, loud, the car jolted. A bullet. Ethan screamed, ducking low. Clara slammed her foot down on the gas, but the road ahead curved too sharply to follow at that speed. The tires lost grip. The car spun once, twice, before skidding off the path and slamming to a stop against a fence. The engine sputtered and died. Smoke curled from the hood. "Out," she gasped, fumbling with her seatbelt. Ethan, out now. He hesitated, terrified. She yanked his door open and pulled him out into the rain. The air was cold and sharp, filled with the metallic scent of mud and fear. Behind them, the pursuing car slowed, headlights glowing through the downpour. Clara grabbed Ethan's hand and ran. They stumbled up a slope toward the cover of the trees. The ground was slick, the mud pulling at their shoes, but adrenaline pushed her forward. Branches whipped at her face as they entered the forest, the headlights still following. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. They ducked behind a fallen log, crouching low. The rain hissed against the leaves above them, muffling the world. Ethan's whisper trembled. "Are they going to kill us?" Clara looked at him, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with fear, and something inside her hardened. "No," she said fiercely. "I won't let them." A car door slammed in the distance. Voices, 2 of them, cut through the storm. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew the tone. They were searching. Clara's mind raced. They needed to move deeper into the woods, toward the old trails that wound up the ridge. She remembered seeing a ranger cabin once, long ago. Maybe it was still there. She took Ethan's hand again. "Quiet, follow me." They crept through the trees, their movements drowned by the wind. Every crack of a branch sounded like thunder in her ears. Behind them, flashlights flickered through the rain. Clara pressed a finger to her lips, pulling Ethan behind a thick oak. The lights passed by close enough for her to see the shape of the men. One tall, one shorter, both wearing gloves, both armed. She could hear their voices now. She took the ledger. One said, "We find her, we find the rest." And the stones, she still has one, the ruby. Clara's stomach clenched. They knew. She waited until their lights disappeared, then pulled Ethan further into the dark, her body trembling with exhaustion. After what felt like hours, the sound of the men faded. The forest grew quiet again, except for the slow rhythm of rain dripping through the branches. They stopped at the edge of a small clearing. Through the trees, she could just make out a structure, a small wooden cabin, dark and abandoned but still standing. She exhaled, half in relief, half in disbelief. "Come on." They reached the porch and pushed open the door. It creaked loudly, echoing in the empty space. Inside, the air smelled of rot and old pine, but it was shelter. Clara helped Ethan sit against the wall. He was shivering, his lips pale. "Mom," he whispered, "what's going to happen to us?" Clara crouched beside him, brushing wet hair from his face. "We'll be okay," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "I promise." He nodded weakly, curling against her. Outside, the thunder rolled again, farther now. The forest swallowed the sound. Clara leaned her head against the wall, staring at the ruby still glowing faintly in her palm. The tiny SOS shimmered under the dim light. She whispered to herself, "You tried to warn me, didn't you, Hale?" The ruby felt warm again, unnaturally so, as if responding. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw something reflected in its glow. An image, a face she didn't recognize. Then it was gone. She clenched her fist around it. "Whatever you started, I'll finish it." Outside, somewhere in the distance, the sound of engines faded away. For now, the hunt had paused, but she knew it wouldn't last. The past didn't stop chasing just because you ran out of road. It waited, patient, relentless, until you turned to face it. As the rain softened and the forest exhaled, Clara sat in the quiet, clutching the stone that had rewritten her life. Somewhere beyond the trees, the men searched and plotted. But for the first time, she didn't feel powerless. The storm had stripped everything away. Now there was only truth, and she was ready to find it. The morning came pale and silent, the kind of quiet that only follows chaos. Mist hung between the trees like breath that hadn't yet exhaled, softening the world into something almost kind. Clara woke slowly, every muscle aching, the smell of damp wood clinging to her clothes. Ethan was still asleep beside her, curled beneath her jacket, his chest rising and falling in the faint rhythm of peace she hadn't seen in weeks. For a moment, she let herself just watch him, the small details that the noise of life often buried. The freckles under his eyes, the way his fingers twitched when he dreamed, the fragile reminder that he was still here, still alive, still hers. She leaned back against the cabin wall and closed her eyes. The last 24 hours played in her mind like scenes from someone else's nightmare. The chase, the shattering glass, the ruby burning in her pocket. Every sound, every flash of light replayed until it felt burned into her bones. When she finally stood, the forest greeted her with quiet patience. The world smelled of wet pine and earth. Sunlight tried to break through the canopy, its first beams turning the mist into gold. For the first time in days, Clara felt something close to peace. She stepped outside, her shoes sinking softly into the mud, and looked toward the east. The storm clouds had broken apart overnight, revealing a strip of blue sky at the horizon. The air felt clean, alive. From her pocket she pulled out the ruby. Its deep red core no longer glowed like it had before. Instead it shimmered faintly, almost calm, like it too was tired. She turned it over in her palm, letting the sunlight pass through. The faint engraving SOS was still there, hidden in the fracture. "I heard you," she whispered. "I just don't know what you wanted me to do." The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of something faintly metallic. She followed it with her eyes until she saw the old trail leading deeper into the forest, curving toward the ridgeline. The thought came to her as quietly as the wind itself. Keep going. She went back inside, nudged Ethan gently awake. "Hey," she whispered, "it's morning." He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Did they leave, for now?" she said. "We can't stay here, though. They'll circle back." He sat up slowly, blinking at her. "Where are we going?" Clara looked out the window at the faint path, winding into the mist. "To find out what Hale wanted us to find." Ethan frowned. "The guy who hid the gems." She nodded. "The one who tried to protect them." He hesitated, but when he saw the determination in her eyes, he simply said, "Okay." They gathered what little they had: a half-empty bottle of water, a flashlight, a granola bar. Clara tucked the ruby back into her pocket, close to her heart, as if keeping it near could somehow guide her. The forest grew denser as they walked. Sunlight filtered through in fractured rays, the smell of wet leaves and cedar rich in the air. Birds sang high in the branches, the world slowly coming alive again after the storm. Each step felt like a step away from fear, but also deeper into something unknown. Hours passed before the trees began to thin, revealing the stretch of land beyond, a vast desert plain framed by distant hills. And there, standing alone under the rising sun, was what looked like the remains of an old airfield: rusting hangars, faded signage, a cracked tarmac overrun by weeds. Ethan shielded his eyes. "What is this place?" Clara stared at the letters, barely visible on the hangar wall. "Starlane Air Cargo." Her breath caught. "It's connected," she murmured. "The same company. The bus was part of this." They approached slowly, their footsteps crunching on gravel. The air grew warmer as the mist faded. A sign lay half buried in sand near the entrance. Faded words read, "Private property closed since 1962. Inside, dust floated through shafts of sunlight that pierced holes in the roof. Broken crates lay scattered across the concrete floor, their labels long worn away. Clara's heart pounded as she stepped deeper in. Every sound echoed, each footstep, each breath. Then she saw it, an office door at the far end, its glass cracked but still intact. On the door, in peeling gold paint, "R. Hale, Operations Director." Her throat tightened. Ethan whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" She nodded, "Yes." Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, the rusted hinge groaning open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and time. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, most of them pried open and empty. A single desk sat in the middle of the room, half covered in dust, sunlight pooling across its surface, and there, beneath the dust, something caught the light. A small metal box. Clara approached slowly, her pulse quickening. The box was locked, but the keyhole was rusted wide. She didn't need a key, just a screwdriver from the drawer beside it. With a firm twist, the latch gave way. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each one marked with the same seal, a small crown above crossed keys, the same emblem that had been stamped on the wax of Hale's warning letter. Clara sat down, spreading the papers across the desk. The first letter she opened was dated June 1, 1961. To the board it read, "The stones arrived intact, but the truth of their origin cannot remain buried. These are not gems, they are blood money, born from suffering. I will not deliver them to the buyers in Santiago. The shipment ends with me." Her breath caught. She flipped to another letter, written days later in trembling script. "They have discovered my refusal. They're coming for me. If I can reach the desert, I'll hide the bus. Someone must find it one day. Someone who will know what to do." Her hand went to the ruby in her pocket. The realization hit like sunlight breaking through a storm. Hale hadn't been running to hide his guilt. He'd been running to redeem it. He hadn't buried treasure. He'd buried a confession. Tears welled in her eyes. "You were trying to make it right," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, confused. "What does it mean?" Clara turned toward him, her voice trembling but steady. "It means these gems were never meant to be sold. They were meant to be found by someone who wouldn't use them for greed." Outside, the wind swept through the hangar, lifting the dust into swirls that glittered like faint embers. Clara smiled faintly through her tears. "He didn't just hide a fortune," she said softly. "He hid a chance for someone to set things right." For the first time in weeks, the fear in her chest eased, replaced by something quieter. Purpose. Ethan touched her arm gently. "So, what do we do now?" Clara looked out toward the horizon. "We finish what he started." She took one last look at the letters, then folded them carefully into her bag. As they stepped back into the sunlight, she could almost feel the air lighten around her, as if the ghost of Ronald Hale himself had finally exhaled. The road ahead stretched long and empty beneath the warming sky, but it no longer looked lonely. It looked like redemption. As Clara and Ethan walked away from the hangar, the wind carried with it the faintest sound, a soft metallic rattle, like the whisper of an old engine turning over one last time. The past was still alive, but now it was guiding them forward. The sun had climbed higher by the time Clara and Ethan reached the edge of the old airfield. The morning mist had burned away, leaving behind an endless horizon painted in gold and rust. The desert stretched for miles, quiet, immense, ancient. The hangar loomed behind them like a tomb of the past, its rusted frame groaning in the wind. Clara turned back once, squinting into the distance. She felt it in her bones, the strange piece of a mystery no longer buried, and yet a warning in the silence that followed. She slipped the ruby from her pocket and held it up to the light. Its glow was soft now, the fractured heart still marked with those 3 faint letters, SOS. It no longer felt like a cry for help. It felt like a promise kept. But the quiet didn't last. In the distance, across the sunlit plain, a faint dust cloud stirred. It moved slowly at first, then faster, rising like smoke, spreading like warning. Ethan followed her gaze. "Mom, that's not wind, is it?" Clara's stomach dropped. The glint of metal flashed at the heart of that moving haze. "Vehicles. More than one. They found us," she whispered. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the horizon. There was nowhere to hide. No trees, no rocks, only flat desert and the remnants of the past. She grabbed Ethan's hand. "Come on." They broke into a run, heading toward the far side of the airfield where the cracked tarmac gave way to open dunes. The heat was already rising, shimmering off the ground like glass. Each step kicked up dust that clung to their shoes and clothes. Behind them, engines roared to life. The sound crawled through the air like thunder, 3 vehicles moving fast. Ethan stumbled, panting. "Mom, we can't outrun cars." "I know." Her eyes darted toward the hangar again. Her mind raced. Hale's letters, his words, they hadn't been just a confession. They were a trail. A story left behind for someone to finish, and maybe a clue. She turned back, pulling Ethan with her. Inside, now, they rushed through the hangar doors, slamming them shut behind them. The echoes rolled through the empty space like cannon fire. Ethan collapsed against a crate, breath ragged. What do we do? Clara's eyes swept the room, searching. There had to be something, anything, they could use. That's when she noticed a large wooden crate near the back, half covered by a top. It was newer than the others, its wood clean and unrotted. Curiosity overrode exhaustion. She pulled at the top. Beneath it, stamped in faded black paint, was a familiar name. Silver Starline Logistics Return to Origin. Her pulse surged. She tore the lid open. Inside, among shredded packing paper, lay a small metal container, a briefcase locked but light, on its surface engraved faintly, R.H. Hale. She breathed. Ethan stood beside her. Is that his? She nodded. It must be. Maybe this is what he couldn't destroy. From her bag, she pulled the screwdriver and forced the latch open. The briefcase creaked, and inside lay a single object wrapped in oilcloth. Clara unrolled it slowly. Inside was a smaller box of brass, and within that papers, brittle but intact. Maps, diagrams, and one photograph. Ronald Hale standing beside the bus, smiling, a small child on his shoulders. Behind them, a banner read, Starline Relief Convoy 1961. Ethan frowned. Relief Convoy. Clara's heart twisted. He wasn't smuggling for himself. He was stealing from them. To fund evacuations, not wars. The truth hit like light breaking through a storm. Hale had been painted a thief because he turned against his employers, because he'd used their dirty money to save the innocent. The gems weren't bloodstones anymore. They were redemption stones. But before she could say it aloud, the sound of engines outside ripped through the air again. They'd arrived. Ethan's voice shook. Mom. Clara snapped the briefcase shut. We can't let them find this. She grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the side door, but before they could reach it, the metallic clang of boots echoed outside the hangar. Shadows passed across the thin slats of sunlight streaming through the broken walls. She froze, pressing Ethan against the wall, motioning for silence. The main door creaked open. Sunlight poured in. Two men stepped inside, dark suits, guns drawn, moving with the slow precision of predators. Their eyes scanned the hangar, sweeping across the dust, the old crates, the silence. One of them called out, Mrs. Mitchell, we only want what you found. Hand it over, and this ends peacefully. Clara's breath trembled, her back pressed against the cold metal wall. Ethan whispered, they're lying. She nodded faintly. The men split up, one moving left, the other right. Their footsteps echoed closer. Clara's hand brushed against something behind her, a rusted lever built into the wall. She didn't know what it was, but it felt connected to the hangar doors. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She looked at Ethan. When I say run, run. He shook his head. No, I'm not leaving, now. She yanked the lever down. A deafening screech filled the air as the old machinery came to life. The massive doors on the opposite side of the hangar grinding open. Sunlight exploded through the space, blinding the men. Run, she shouted. They bolted through the light, the sound of gunfire cracking behind them. Bullets punched through the metal walls, sparks flying. Clara felt one pass close enough to burn her arm, but she didn't stop. They sprinted across the field, sand flying around their legs. Behind them, the hangar roared with echoing shouts. Ethan gasped, Mom, where are we going? She pointed toward a cluster of half-collapsed structures at the far end of the tarmac. There, they dove behind the ruins, lungs burning, bodies shaking. The world was nothing but sunlight, dust, and fear. For a moment there was silence, only the distant hum of engines and the rush of blood in her ears. Then Ethan spoke, his voice small but certain. You said these stones weren't meant to be sold. Then maybe they're not meant to be hidden either. Clara turned to him, startled. What do you mean? He looked at her with a steadiness that reminded her of his father. The good parts, the parts that believed in right even when the world didn't. Maybe they were meant to help people, Mom, just like Hale wanted. The idea hung between them, simple and pure. She exhaled slowly. Then that's what we'll do. She looked toward the horizon again, the open desert stretching endlessly ahead. For the first time, the road didn't look like an escape. It looked like purpose. Clara reached for her son's hand, holding it tightly as they rose. We're not running anymore. He squeezed back. Then what are we doing? She smiled faintly. We're going to finish his story. Behind them, the hangar stood like a monument to the truth. Dust swirling in the doorway, sunlight spilling through. And as they walked into the open desert, the ruby glowed faintly in her pocket, its fractured heart catching the light. No longer a warning, but a signal. A beacon. Some debts couldn't be erased with money, but with courage, and the will to make wrong things right, they could finally be paid. As the desert wind carried away the last echoes of the chase, Clara didn't look back. Redemption wasn't behind her. It was the road ahead waiting to be walked. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, burnt gold under the rising sun, a landscape so vast it made them look like ghosts moving through history. The air shimmered with heat, each breath tasting of dust and salt. Clara's throat ached, her legs heavy, but she didn't slow down. The briefcase was clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Behind them, the hangar was only a distant silhouette, wet naus, small, silent, and fading into the haze. The wind had begun to howl, sweeping trails of sand across their path like smoke. Ethan trudged beside her, face flushed from exhaustion. Mom, where are we even going? Clara didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the horizon, to the coordinates. She finally said, "The ones Hale left behind, they're out here somewhere." Ethan frowned. "You think he buried something else? I think he buried the truth." The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, whispering across the dunes like a voice trying to speak. Clara tightened her grip on the briefcase. Every instinct told her the end of this road wasn't safety. It was a reckoning. Hours passed. The desert heat burned away the morning's coolness, replacing it with a merciless, shimmering glare. Their footprints stretched behind them in a fading line, soon to be erased by wind. When they finally saw movement ahead, a small, rusted sign half buried in sand, Clara's pulse quickened. She brushed it clean with her sleeve. 2 words were barely visible beneath decades of corrosion. Starline Outpost. Her chest tightened. This is it. The outpost was little more than a collection of skeletal structures, one crumbling shed, a collapsed fuel pump, and a wind-beaten flagpole still standing sentinel against time. The metal siding rattled faintly in the wind, the only sound for miles. Ethan looked around nervously. "Mom, what if they're already here?" Clara opened the briefcase, pulling out the maps Hale had drawn. Lines and notes crisscrossed the yellowed paper. One of them ended in a red X scrawled near a symbol that looked like a well. "There," she said, pointing toward a small mound of stone in the distance. "Help me." They walked the last few hundred yards in silence. Each step felt heavier than the last. When they reached the mound, she dropped to her knees and brushed the sand away with her hands. At first, there was nothing. Just rock and dust. Then, metal. She dug faster. The edge of a box appeared, its corners eaten by rust. It was larger than the briefcase, heavy when she pulled it free. Her fingers shook as she forced the latch open. Inside were more velvet pouches, sealed, untouched, and a single leather-bound journal resting on top. She lifted it gently. The first page was dated June 20, 1961. the day before Ronald Hale disappeared. If you are reading this, I did not survive the journey. I did not steal for greed, but for mercy. The stones were meant to fund blood, not hope. I took them to buy freedom for those whose hands bled to mine them. If they come for you, don't hide them. Use them to build what they destroyed. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She could almost hear his voice, steady, desperate, kind. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. He wasn't a thief. No, she whispered. He was the only honest man in a world of liars. The sound of engines shattered the stillness. She turned sharply. Far across the dunes, dust rose again. 3 vehicles, closing fast. Ethan's voice trembled. "Mom." Clara slammed the journal shut. "We've got to move." They grabbed the briefcase and the journal and sprinted toward the broken shed, sand whipping around their legs. The roar of the engines grew louder, closer, until she could feel the vibration beneath her feet. They ducked inside, pressing against the wall. Through a crack in the metal, she could see them, the same men from the hangar. The lead car stopped barely 50 feet away. The tall man stepped out first, followed by 2 others. He called out, his voice calm but cold, "Mrs. Mitchell, I told you we'd be in touch." Clara's pulse hammered. The man continued, stepping closer. "You've made this much harder than it needed to be. The stones don't belong to you." "They didn't belong to you either," Clara shouted back before she could stop herself. He smiled thinly. "You sound like Hale. He said the same thing before he died." The words hit her like a punch. "You killed him." The man tilted his head, indifferent. "He chose the wrong side of history, just like you're doing now." Clara stepped out from the shed, dirt clinging to her hands, eyes blazing. "The wrong side of history is the side that buries the truth." He sighed, almost pitying. "You have no idea what those gems represent." "I know exactly what they represent," she snapped. "Lives, blood, people who never got a choice." The man's calm facade cracked for the first time. "You think you can rewrite history? You're one woman with a rusted bus and a fantasy about justice." Clara took a slow step forward. "Maybe, but Hale believed someone would finish what he started. I think he meant me." The man nodded to his partners. They raised their guns. Ethan screamed, "Mom, don't move." The man warned, but Clara did. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ruby. The sunlight hit it just right, igniting its core in a burst of red light. For a split second the desert seemed to burn. "This is what you're killing for," she shouted, her voice echoing across the empty plain. "A stone, look at it, it's beautiful. And it's cursed. You can't bury sins with glitter." The men hesitated. Even the tall man faltered, the gun lowering slightly as the reflection of the ruby flickered across his face. In that moment, Clara hurled it as hard as she could. The gem arced through the air, flashing like a falling star before disappearing into the sand. All 3 men turned instinctively to follow its path. Clara grabbed Ethan's arm. "Run." They bolted across the dunes, feet pounding against the hot earth. Behind them, shouts erupted, gunfire cracking through the air. Bullets tore through the sand around them, each one a breath away from death. Clara kept running, heart hammering, lungs burning. The sound of Ethan's terrified breathing was the only thing keeping her grounded. They dove behind a jagged rock outcrop, gasping for air. The sun beat down mercilessly, the heat shimmering like fire around them. Clara peeked over the edge. The men were fanning out, searching, their voices growing distant in the wind. Ethan grabbed her arm. "You threw it away." "I had to." "But it was worth millions." She looked at him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Some things aren't worth keeping, Ethan. Especially when they cost you your soul." He stared at her, chest heaving, then nodded slowly. The desert wind rose again, carrying with it the faint echo of the ruby's fall, like a heartbeat fading into the distance. The men were still searching, but something in their movements had changed. The tall one was shouting now, angry, desperate. Clara realized then, He hadn't just wanted the gems, he needed them, and that gave her power. She turned to Ethan, voice low but fierce. He's afraid. That means we still have a chance. Ethan swallowed hard. What do we do? She looked back toward the vehicles parked far behind them, the engines idling under the sun. Her jaw tightened. We finish this. As the sun bled red across the desert horizon, Clara rose from the sand, no longer running, no longer hiding. The woman who had once been broken now carried the courage of two lives, her own and the man who had died for the truth. The confrontation had begun, and this time she wouldn't run from the storm. She would become it. The wind howled across the desert like a living thing, sweeping dust over the tracks of Clara's flight. Heat shimmered across the dunes, painting the horizon in waves of gold and blood. Every heartbeat seemed to echo through the vast emptiness. Clara crouched behind the jagged rock, her breath shallow, the distant shouts of the men carrying through the wind. Ethan pressed close beside her, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear but burning with something else, trust. She wiped the sweat from her brow, scanning the desert. The three men had spread out, silhouettes against the molten light. The leader, the tall one with the sharp, predatory calm, was barking orders, his voice steady even through the chaos. He wasn't just chasing them. He was directing something larger, something colder than greed. Clara whispered, "They're organized. This isn't just about the money. It never was." Ethan's voice trembled. "Then what do they want?" Clara's eyes narrowed. "Control, secrets, the kind of power money can't buy." The man's voice cut through the wind again. "Mrs. Mitchell," his tone was patient, almost polite, as though they were negotiating over coffee instead of life and death. "We can end this without tragedy. You've already destroyed one of the stones, but we know you still have the rest." Clara's stomach twisted. She looked down at the bag beside her, Hale's journal, the briefcase, the manifest, all the pieces of truth that had survived decades of silence. They're what he wants, she realized, not the gems, the proof. She took a slow, steadying breath. Ethan tugged her sleeve. "Mom, we can't fight them." Clara's gaze was fixed ahead. "No, but we can finish this." They waited until the men split farther apart, searching the dunes for any sign of movement. Clara seized the moment. She grabbed the journal and tucked it into Ethan's jacket, zipping it tight. "If anything happens," she whispered, "you run north. Don't stop until you see the highway." "No," Ethan hissed, clutching her arm. "I'm not leaving you." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a mirror of herself, the same stubbornness, the same fire. Ethan. This all started with someone trying to do the right thing, even when it cost everything. "I need you to carry that forward, no matter what happens to me." His lip trembled. "Mom," but before he could finish, gunfire cracked through the air. The rock exploded beside them, sending shards of stone into the sand. Clara pulled Ethan down, covering him with her body as dust and heat filled the air. The tall man's voice echoed again, closer now. "You can't hide forever." Clara's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but something inside her, something new, something steel, refused to bow any more. She turned to Ethan, eyes fierce. "Stay low, follow when I say." Then she stood. The desert light hit her like a spotlight as she stepped out from behind the rock, raising her empty hands. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. The tall man spotted her immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell," he called, lowering his gun slightly. "Finally, you're smarter than I thought." "Put it down," she said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the wind. He smiled faintly. "That's not how this works." "I'm not here to bargain," she said. "I'm here to end this." He stopped walking. His men flanked out to his sides, their weapons aimed at her chest. "You had your chance to cooperate," he said softly. "Now you'll give me the rest, or I'll take it from what's left of your home." Her blood went cold. "You went to my house," his grin widened. "While you were running in circles out here, my associates paid a visit. Such a shame, that beautiful old bus of yours. It didn't look very sturdy. Clara's breath caught. "What did you do?" he shrugged. "Let's just say it's not going to hold secrets anymore." Rage flooded her veins. Every ounce of fear she'd carried since the moment she bought that bus burned away, replaced by something hotter, brighter. "That bus," she said through gritted teeth, "carried more truth than you'll ever understand." He tilted his head. "Truth doesn't matter, Mrs. Mitchell, only ownership." He raised his gun. A single shot split the air. But it wasn't his. One of the fuel barrels near the old outpost exploded in a flash of fire, the shockwave knocking sand and debris across the plain. The men ducked instinctively, shouting. Ethan had climbed the rocks, clutching the flare gun he'd found in the wrecked shed. His hands shook, but his aim had been true. Clara seized the opening. She charged forward, tackling the tall man as his weapon fired wildly into the air. They hit the sand hard, the impact jarring through her bones. He was stronger. He rolled her onto her back, pressing down with the barrel of his gun against her throat. "You should have stayed quiet," he snarled, "like Hale should have." Clara's voice came out strangled but fierce. He stayed human. Her hand shot upward, grabbing a handful of sand, shoving it into his eyes. He roared, stumbling back. She kicked upward with every ounce of strength left, sending him sprawling. Ethan ran toward her, shouting, "Mom!" Clara scrambled to her feet, grabbing the fallen briefcase. "Run!" They sprinted toward the old windmill tower, its metal frame swaying in the wind. Behind them, gunfire erupted again, bullets tearing through the sand. They reached the base of the tower just as another explosion rocked the air, the last of the barrels catching fire, sending flames roaring through the old outpost. The tall man shouted, "Stop them! Don't let them leave with that case." Clara climbed the tower ladder, dragging Ethan behind her. The wind howled around them, the metal trembling under their weight. Below, the men closed in, their guns glinting in the sunlight. At the top, Clara reached a rusted platform overlooking the burning desert. The smoke twisted upward, black against gold. She opened the briefcase one last time, revealing Hale's documents, the ledger, the letters, the proof of everything. "Mom," Ethan gasped, "what are you doing?" She looked at him, her face streaked with ash and tears. "Finishing what he started." Below, the tall man shouted her name, his voice rising above the fire. Clara took one deep breath, then lifted the briefcase over her head. "This isn't yours anymore," she shouted. It never was. And with that, she hurled it into the fire. The briefcase struck the ground and burst open. Flames consumed the papers instantly, the words of corruption and confession turning to ash and smoke.